Good morning to everyone and welcome to this panel session. My name is Susanna Hasenöl. I'm the sustainability speaker as well as Director Asia at Yara International, looking after the digital solution portfolio for smallholder farmers in Asia. But today our topic is seafood and sustainable aquaculture. Global aquaculture is seeing a robust growth of about 4.5% a year. And whilst we see the demand grow, natural fish stocks are dwindling. Seaspiracy has shed some light of some of the problem areas in the industry. Even perhaps the material wasn't quite representative or up to date. This topic is now in our living rooms and on our dining tables. There seems to be a consensus that the fishing system requires an overhaul. And it's also important from a nutritional perspective, for large parts of the world population rely on fishing and seafood as their main source of protein. But what are the remedies to address these shortcomings? Can technology, innovation, and regulation make a difference? What's the role of corporate sustainability initiatives that they may conduct voluntarily or involuntarily to create a better seafood supply chain? So some of the questions we will discuss today with the panelists are, where are we really in terms of sustainability for seafood? And how could we best advance it to make it more sustainable? And to be a bit more precise, some of the exact questions that we will be taking a deeper dive today are precision fishing versus precision farming. What's the best solution here? Wild caught, farmed, or new protein? Are the new protein fishing companies able to swim already? That'll be interesting to hear. And what about traceability? Is it really going mainstream already? And what is the role of technology in making that happen? And what about procurement by the industry players? Do they already have the tools they need to have that kind of proper traceability down to the fish in the seas? And finally, is seafood actually today too cheap to be sustainable? I'm pleased now to introduce you the panel of today, a distinct group of people, of experts from fishing and seafood industries, as well as other organizations. We have Dr. Dalal Al-Gavas, who is the program director at Big Idea Ventures, a leading venture capital firm investing tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, into aquaculture, as well as cell-based and plant-based alternatives. We also have Chester Garn from World Wildlife Fund. He is responsible for the seafood program there and working both with the supply as well as demand side of responsible seafood players. We also have David Carter, CEO of Austral Fisheries, a commercial fishing operator that's been around for quite some time and that is now a trailblazer in many of the new innovative areas, advancing the sustainability area and focus in fishing. We also have Cheryl Maria Antonina Sami, who is a director at Infofish. Infofish is an intergovernmental organization that works with other governmental agencies in about 12 countries in the region, not just in Malaysia, but in Thailand, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and many of the other Pacific islands. So please welcome our panelists today. I would like to start the panel session with Cheryl. Cheryl, what are the key trends that you see in the demand and supply for sustainable seafood in Asia?
Right, thanks, Susanna. If you allow me, I'd like to share my slide just so that we have some. Yeah, so just to quickly sum up on the current situation, we all know that with the impact of COVID-19, it has been quite a challenging time for the global seafood sector. However, based on this table that you see, which is produced by FAO, we do see some positive outlook in terms of the fisheries production, where it's forecast to have an increase in both capture and aquaculture fisheries. And this is because of how the industry has coped with the COVID-19 pandemic, where we see many of the producers, retailers as, who have actually looked into other options on how they could ensure their businesses stay afloat. Many opportunities have emerged during this period. And what I'd like to highlight here is the demand for sustainable seafood, or rather safe seafood, has actually become even stronger during this period, simply because of the need of the situation. Many people or consumers are looking for whether they have access to safe seafood. The way we are looking, or the way we are selecting our food these days has changed. We are buying more online. We are also making sure that the food or seafood that we are purchasing is safe. Hence, this has actually increased the demand for certified, safe, chemical-free seafood products. I would say the concept of sustainable seafood is pretty much new, relatively new in Asia, but it is increasing, as I said. And the situation with COVID has actually strengthened this, this demand. And many companies are also turning into or making sure that they are using traceability to address the sustainability factors.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for sharing that with us. If we are to focus on some of these issues a little bit deeper, what do you really see as the biggest issues that need to be most urgently solved in the Asia region?
I think, in my opinion, I think the access to safe seafood and the awareness needs to increase. We do have consumers. There are consumers who are aware, but then it's not widely sort of publicized, as in to have how can I get access to safer seafood? How can I ensure my seafood is certified from this source? Why is certification important? Why is it important to ensure that my seafood is properly packed or properly transported? The importance of cold chain. This still needs to some of the areas that needs to be addressed.
And what would you say is the state of cold chain in Asia now?
I think we have. I mean, there has been significant increase. Many companies. There's so many big businesses who are doing very well. Even small, medium scales businesses have applied this to ensure that the cold chain is being met. But what I'm saying is this, in order to ensure the whole industry is moving towards having safer seafood, this also needs to cover those who are from the small scale industries.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of safety, what are really the critical elements here, apart from maintaining cold chain all the way to the consumer?
Well, I think maintaining the cold chain is, I think, the most important. And that actually, also boils down to the fact that whether some of these small scale fisheries have access to financial support to ensure that this is being maintained as well. So yeah, I still feel that the cold chain is the most important thing in order to ensure that you have safe seafood.
And what are some of the leading solutions that you see in this space, especially when it comes down to supporting the smaller fishers and fisheries in the region?
I think there are, at this point, I think there are a number of companies, big companies in Asia, or the bigger ones, I would say, who are working together with the governments to also help the small scale fishers in terms of allowing them to have access to this technology or the the proper equipment in order to have access to or maintain this cold chain. So this is something that is being done. Many companies are already applying, as I said, traceability as a means to ensure or address the sustainability matters. Even in the Pacific, you already have companies who are trying or testing this traceability system already. So these are some of the advances that is taking place here in this region.
Great, thank you very much for sharing that. We will be talking about the traceability aspect in more detail with some of the other speakers as well. But before we move on with our agenda, I still wanted to ask you a little bit more about the financial solutions to create those cold chain solutions. Would you be able to pinpoint some initiatives or programs that actually provide the financial means for the smallholder or smaller fisheries in particular that may not be having those solutions disposable yet?
Well, I know that are a number of projects that are being carried out by FAO and also other regional organizations like CIFDEC and NACA to help the smaller scale industry. So in terms of specific financial support, I'm not able to point it right now, but I can tell you that the regional organizations are, including Infofish, are providing this assistance to help them to gain this access to ensure that they have sustainable or rather adhere to sustainable guidelines.
Right, and if you were to guess, what's the percentage of the fisheries now having access or being in a position to have the cold chain down to the consumer? What would be that number roughly in Asia currently?
Well, I'm not very sure whether I'm, I'm in a position to make that guess, but in my opinion and in my experience, I would say at least 75%.
Okay.
We have, yeah.
Well, that's very good already. But obviously, we want to close the loop to provide safer food for everyone, right? But Chester, what's your view on these big sustainability issues in?
Thanks, Susanna. Yes, indeed, for WWF, industry procurement is one of the key drivers we face in terms of transitioning the seafood industry towards sustainability. And there's really two reasons why we identify this as a priority area. So I think you've touched on this in your introduction. Continued consumption of unsustainable seafood could leave not just Singapore facing major food security challenges, but it's also extremely detrimental to the seafood industry because it leads to supply challenges such as supply instability and unfortunately also price volatility. So I think it's really important just to underline that this is not confined to just Singapore, but all countries that are dependent on seafood as a major source, which is unfortunately a majority of the countries in Southeast Asia. So while WWF understands that a multi-stakeholder approach is needed, businesses play a key role because they actually have a disproportionate impact on the supply chain due to their higher volume of procurement and their long-standing relationships with suppliers. When it comes to sustainability within the hospitality industry, there are quite a variety of tools available so that they can start their sustainable seafood journey on. So this will include, for example, seafood guides, which some of our national officers have released as a way to help not just consumers, but also kind of businesses identify priority species to avoid. So our seafood guides really underlying methodology of it has been developed with quite a bit of scientific rigor with science-based methodologies, and has allowed us to not just assess the sustainability of wild-caught fisheries, but also aquaculture, and allowed us to develop a database of different species that are on a global level for what is possibly sustainable based on the fish stock. And this database is also accessible to some of our industry partners.
Great to hear that you have such an additional resource available. Does that add cost to the either to the buyers or sellers, or is this something you provide free of charge to the ecosystem?
As for our transformational partnerships, mostly they don't really avoid cost, but because the database does require some sort of upkeep, some sort of maintenance. In some cases, if you are willing to add to the database by funding some assessment, because assessment itself will take some cost, then yes, you can have access to the database if you're in a transformation partnership with WWF.
And despite this database and some other solutions, financial and technical, as Charlene shared with us, what are the biggest bottlenecks that still remain to make fishing more sustainable and aquaculture also more sustainable in your view?
Yeah, that's a very important topic. I think Charlene touched on this, and I think I'll concur with her. I think one of the biggest issues is really inertia, the tendency to kind of stick to the status quo, especially in Southeast Asia. And there's a lack of awareness of really how urgent, how critical this emergency is to the seafood industry. I think it's important to highlight that sustainability previously, historically, has really been couched in terms of future generations, securing the need, securing the responsibility to future generations. But it's becoming more apparent that the future is really not too distant. It's also to secure the livelihoods and jobs for current industry players. So, I mean, if you look at the World Economic Forum, who reported in 2021, the majority of top 5 global risks in terms of likelihood and impact are all environmental risks. So this is a current and relevant problem right now.
Why do you think there is still so much inertia, whether it's among the buyers or the producers, so to say?
I think one reason is really data deficiency as well. Even if you want to do want to adopt some sourcing practices, especially within Southeast Asia, it's notoriously opaque. There's just not enough information just to identify which products are sustainable. Or even if you have responsible products, can you verify that it's coming from this particular fish stock? Because this aggregation, this transshipment happening, and we can't really see it. It's not always visible. So this regional problem really really hinders businesses from actually adopting any sustainable sourcing practices. So it's just easier to go with the status quo. Yeah.
So beyond the database and the scientific knowledge that you share with your partners, does WWF actually have some technical solutions and tracking and tracing solutions that you're perhaps co-developing with the industry or even with the consumers today?
Yeah, I think where we focus on mainly is with certification schemes that are really global. So these certification schemes, of course, have the chain of custody component, which is a traceability mechanism for companies to be able to see that the ASC certified product or the MSC certified product at the end consumer level can reach all the way back to the food fish farm or the fishery in question. So the certification is just mainly where we're working at the moment, but we see a huge explosion in technologies regarding traceability. And I believe that will really be one of the key ways that this area will develop.
And do you think that at any point in time in the near future, this kind of digital or other technology-enabled tracking and traceability would also actually be merged with these certificates?
No, yeah, I definitely think so. I think the ASC, I work very closely with ASC because, as I mentioned, the fishery sector in Singapore is not that big, so we work more with the ASC than with MSC. But they're constantly trying to make themselves relevant, and with traceability information and traceability systems that are being developed to really be able to track along the supply chain, there's definitely a area of development that can merge between these two technologies and really increase transparency in the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. And before I hand over to David, also to share his view on this topic, my final question to you, Chester, at this point in time is, for those who are not so familiar with these seafood certificates, MSC and was it DSC, could you please briefly just share with the audience what are these certificates about? Just very briefly, please.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's quite a big topic though. Like Marine Stewardship Council, which is MSC, and Aquaculture Stewardship Council, ASC, which are some of the global certification schemes. We've got, I think, the State of Sustainability Initiative is actually listed them as some of the more rigorous ones when it comes to sustainability within the fisheries. There's the farm level, and then for the companies along the supply chain, there's the chain of custody level. So you can get certified to be able to hold MSC and ASC products, and they focus both on social and environmental metrics. And they're also trying to be, for ASC, they're very transparent with stakeholder involvement, as well as within the standard setting process, as well as the auditing process. So all this really helps with science-based metrics to really look at sustainability through this lens and ensure that the farm that's producing or the fishery that's producing is following these guidelines.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that. And for all of those who are in our audience today, if you do have any questions, and I mean any questions to our panelists here, please use the chat window on your right-hand side and post your questions. Following this panel, we will have some time to address those. So please do share whatever questions you have on your mind, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of this session. You may also have seen a poll popping up on your screen. So we would also like to get your view on the outlook of sustainable aquaculture. So please do bear in mind that you can actually vote and share your views on our polling question today. But next, David, I know you are one of the front runners when it comes to tracking and tracing fishing in Australian waters, operating some 15 vessels there. Could you tell us a little bit more about what your company is doing to ensure that the fish you catch is sustainable, and what are kind of the technical methods and tools that you are using to make sure of that, and also to document it?
Thanks, Susanna, and that's another really big question. We are privileged to live in a first world market economy where in our operation we have strong property rights, so we consider that's a key bedrock in bringing about best practice fisheries management. And it makes sense because it aligns our self-interest with the expectation of the community. I know many listening from Southeast Asia could but dream of those things, but it's an important part, and it helps us justify the investments that we make in boats and brands, in research to ensure the stocks are sustainable, the observers that go to sea to prove that, and the certification systems that we have with the likes of MSC, as Chester was saying earlier. But as a business, we've kind of gone on from there. We think there's not a lot magical in managing fisheries sustainably. That was pretty much, in a technical sense, that was pretty much worked out 10 or 15 years ago. The trick now is really to find that balance, and we made a sort of more of an understanding around sort of social license, or the ESG elements that you, Susanna, in fact, were talking about earlier. But it's a building block. So it starts with a strong property right. It means a lot of investment in science to get the fisheries stuff right. It means embracing third-party certifications and NGOs through things like the MSC. So that's kind of the foundation. We then build on that with brands, and brands give us something to talk to the world about. Brands, there's so many kind of intangibles in a brand that are emotional and allow us to connect those things that are important to us, to our customers and our supply chain partners. And I learned a few years ago, Susanna, that we do the best business with those people with whom we share our values. And I'm happy to explore that a bit further.
That's great to hear, David, but I'm really curious about the technical aspects of sustainable fishing, because it sounds like you've kind of done it. You say you did it 15 years ago. I think many other parts of the world are still dreaming of that. So could you maybe just give us very briefly an overview of how you're managing a sustainable fish stock, and how do you use technology for that? I think this might still interest many other people in other parts of the world.
Yeah, so the technology, I won't dig into the fishery stuff, but I will come back onto the traceability piece. So you look at all the bits that go into running our business, be it science-based catch limits, be it commercially efficient operations, having good people, having good brands. We then jumped in, and very early days now, 5 years in, we've offset all of our emissions. So we burn about 9 million litres of diesel a year, and that means we go out and plant 200 and something thousand trees a year to fix that. So that's important to us. But in building these brands, it is back to this trust piece, and we've jumped in to a platform with OpenSCG, which is Open Supply Chain. It's a collaboration initially with WWF and Boston Consulting Group Digital Ventures. It allows customers and supply chain partners really to check in on the fish that they're buying, and they can learn anything they like about where it's from, what's the science around sustainability, the name of the firstborn son of the skipper. Well, maybe not that one.
Can you tell us, sorry, just a little bit more about this OpenSCG system? I mean, how can one imagine that happening? I mean, I suppose fish aren't swimming yet with some kind of IoT devices. There's still free animals out there in the ocean. So at what point in time do you actually inject technology into the fishing supply chain, and how?
At point of landing on a fishing boat in the Southern Ocean, these fish have an RFID tag applied that's scanned on and registered, and I have a dashboard I can show in real time how that fish is working through the system, when it's unloaded, where it goes to be further processed for filleting. At that point it gets a QR code on it, and that describes its whole journey. And then around that, there's all the other fluff about carbon neutral and MSC certified, and we have a few other things as well.
So presently, like if you think about SKUs, units of fish, pieces of fish that consumers would buy, like in a year, how many such products do you actually tag with RFID or with a QR code with full traceability, I presume, to these origins?
So all of our Southern Ocean fish, so that's 3 boats, about 2,000 tons of Patagonian toothfish. We're about 1/3 of the way through our prawn fleet. So we've got 11 boats that catch prawns. So that'll be on a not a per prawn basis, you'll be pleased to know. But it's the per unit, it could be 3 kilos or 5 kilos kind of resolution, and then that has applications through into supermarket and improved retail storytelling.
And how can the consumers actually then, retain or retrieve this information about the origins of the fish and about the journey it has had from the seas to the table?
So at this stage, it's a QR code, and there's as much information as you need to know about like everything where that's come from. So I think this is sort of Seaspiracy antidote to some extent. So and if transparency builds trust, then sort of like vigorous transparency builds trust quicker. But trust then translates into loyalty, and loyalty, I think, into premium. And if you can do that in a way, as I said earlier, where all our values are aligned, then it's very easy to make, if you like, these sustainability, ESG kind of targets, rather than detract or become a cost to the business. They actually amplify shareholder value. So it is this notion of business as being relevant to environment and communities, not being a zero-sum game, but still supporting the overall enterprise.
Right. And I suppose you also have some produce that is not yet traced or doesn't have these RFIDs or QR codes, right? So do you see a marked difference on the consumer side between these two product categories? And are there also any differences between individual consumers or families versus business customers, like hotels and restaurants? Are they making use of the traceability offering in a different way? That's a
well-informed question. Not to the extent I would like. So if you like, our leadership here is based on faith to a large extent. I absolutely believe that it's the right thing. You know, we do see value and premium in our brands, but the brands are more than just one element. They're more than just, well, there's a carbon neutral product. They're more than that MSC logo. They're more than what the OpenSCG transparency can deliver. So I am quite confident that we enjoy premiums in our branded products. How you unpack that and to which one of our initiatives you attribute that premium, we don't have any data on that.
Okay, that would be certainly interesting to see at some point. But let's move on with our questions. And I would like to ask Dr. Dalla a few questions. You're obviously taking a completely different approach to seafood and fishing, or seafood and fish-like nutrition, right? With plant-based and cell-based alternatives. How do you see the more kind of traditional animal protein and then the plant and cell-based alternatives faring today in the consumer space as well as among the business customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're putting everything on top of its head, right? So we want to really find, let's say, different solutions to sort of the growing demands of, of meat, seafood, dairy, all types of animal product. And, the plant-based sort of space is really what, set everything, well, let's say what changed everything. So, currently the retail market for plant-based is at $7 billion US dollars. And, big advancements in the industry, such as the Beyond Meat and Impossible Burgers, the Beyond IPO, just showing how, lucrative this type of business can be. And of course, like the growing sort of awareness, the conscious consumers that are now demanding, let's say, alternatives to animal agriculture. So, this has really been the catalyst for this sector, sort of that growing awareness, of course, fueled by a lot of sensational documentaries such as Seaspiracy and many others. But, at the end of the day, we do have a lot of challenges with regards to sustainability. There are going to be, of course, 11 billion people on this planet. And, and also like, when we look at Asia, as well as Asia Pacific more generally, the sort of the growing middle class is really going to be, demanding, better quality protein, better quality food choices. And to meet that demand, we really need to diversify where food is coming from. It's also, yeah.
So if today the market size for alternative protein is about 7 billion, how much of that is actually alternative seafood or fish?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's still a minority share of that market size, but I would say that it's steadily growing. So it's growing by 28%, and it's going to be worth 1.3 billion by 2031. So it has, let's say, been like sort of the last priority, especially because of items such as let's say sustainability like factors, so everything from greenhouse gas emission, water use, as well as the feed to food ratio has really made sort of let's say mammals and poultry more on the radar for people tackling sustainability. But another thing as well is the technology. So let's say plants, so we have the plant-based and the cell-based spaces. And for plant-based, we're using, let's say protein isolates and protein extracts that we then sort of apply technologies like extrusion to, change the texture and make it more fibrous. So that fibrous, let's say, approach has been, let's say, optimized for mammalian, let's say, products. And now seafood is the new frontier. So it's kind of the up and coming, let's say, sector. But we're very glad to see that there are some really good examples from the ecosystem. I mean, you have a lot of companies in the US as well as Europe that have created analogs to everything from shrimp to, let's say, fish cakes, crab cakes, even tuna, and kind of recreating it for everything, for the sort of the food services as well as the ready to eat segment, having sort of these breaded just kind of reheatable versions. So
Talking now, listening to all this talk about food already makes my food mouth water. But what about the consumer adoption, right? I mean, aren't there still a lot of people who say, oh, I want the real thing, you know, it's not the same. Maybe they have some concerns about, you know, genetically modified proteins, perhaps, and versus the other group of people who are saying, you know, we're really concerned with the future of the planet and we want to do everything in our powers to have a smaller personal carbon footprint as well. So how do you see these kind of two forces playing presently in Asia?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, for consumers, of course, there's different segmentation, but, you know, the target consumer for the plant-based space are definitely millennials that are looking to reduce, let's say, animal protein in their diet. Usually that will be for health reasons. There will also be sort of a growing consumer base that have, let's say, allergens. So either like shellfish allergies that will see this as a great alternative, you know, a way that they can enjoy seafood, you know, again, and kind of enjoy it with their family and friends. And, you know, what we're seeing as well is, you know, with this movement, with sort of the rise of, you know, environmentalism, of, you know, let's say animal ethics, that's also going to drive not only millennials, but also the Gen Zers. Which are more, let's say, aware of some of these, you know, challenges and some of the pain points within the, let's say, the animal agriculture sector. So,
thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I'm just really wondering, like David and Charlene, you work more with the traditional fishing and aquaculture side of things, perhaps Chester as well. What are your views on alternate fish and seafood? Is it the necessary addition to the global food supply, or can these two work, you know, streams coexist? What are your thoughts? Anyone want to? David, please.
Yeah, no, I think it's inevitable, really framed by Dalal's assessment of the future. The challenges are immense, and to feed and provide energy to the forecast population sizes means we've got to be doing things a whole lot different than we've been doing them to date, and there's room for everyone. So, say in our business, it's obviously a concern, but I think there's a value in, so the premium end of wild seafood still offering a critical experience. Maybe it's just a once a week treat, or it's Valentine's Day or something. But I think the other kind of issue for me broadly is the opportunity to point to, certainly in Western societies where we sit down to a 400-gram steak or something, increasingly that will become antisocial, that will be frowned upon. And so we do tend, like again, in these societies, we tend to eat too much animal protein. We need to see animal protein as the garnish to the vegetables, and or you can go vegetable all the way if you're following Dalal's business. But I think there's room for everyone.
Chester, what do you think?
No, I definitely agree with both Dalal and David. Right now, just looking at population growth trends, looking at the amount of seafood we eat, there is definitely a need, considering that more than 90% of our fisheries are already fully exploited, overexploited. So there's no growth there. So aquaculture and maybe cell-based meats are just things that could develop, that could fulfill and sate that demand for this growing population. I think our current trends are still with seafood consumption per capita is also growing. So we're basically everyone just eating more, and we just need to find more ways to fill that gap. But what we need to see is still a very new technology. We need to know what the environmental footprint is. We need to know the cost of it before we can really see where the chips lie in terms of cell-based meats, alternative meats, as opposed to aquaculture and fisheries. But yeah, it's too early to tell. But I definitely agree with David that there's room for everyone. There is definitely a need there that needs to be saved.
So we haven't discussed a lot about farmed fish or farmed seafood yet, but how do you actually contrast that to these other alternatives? So wild caught fish and seafood versus plant-based and cell-based seafood and fish. I mean, it's a farmed operation, right? It comes with a certain footprint as well, and feed conversion rates, I believe, remain a problem, especially for many smaller fish farms and seafood farms. So what are your thoughts on this third alternative in this space? Anyone would like to go?
I mean, I can't tell what the environmental footprint for these third alternatives are at the moment. Aquaculture still has quite a bit of area to grow, and with certification schemes, with there are ways to really just kind of dumb down that feed conversion ratio that you mentioned to make it as efficient as possible for feed. So I think they're just not incompatible with each other. They're compatible with each other, basically. They can develop together, and as we see how the alternative meats come out in terms of environmental footprint, then that may be something that, like what Dalal says in terms of Gen Z looking at environmental footprint, looking at health, they may actually deviate to demand more of that sort of source of protein. Yeah.
Charlene, would you like to share any views?
Yes, thanks, Susanna. Yeah, I agree with what was discussed by Dr. Dalal, David, and Chester. And I'd just like to add that I feel that it's going to be an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity for the seafood industry. And I think many companies, seafood companies, are also looking at it as an opportunity. As you see, some seafood companies are also offering plant-based protein as in their adding on it to their range of already seafood products available. So in terms of, as mentioned by Dr. Dalal, there are, well, consumers are becoming more and more health conscious. And although there's availability of farmed products, you also have consumers who are wary about taking farm products. So you're going to have a wide range of consumers who want to ensure that I get the safer seafood, alternative to seafood that, I can have that taste, but, I don't want it from, from a farm, from a source which I'm not comfortable with. So I think this is some of the things that, which I don't think is going to be a threat to the seafood industry. And I think it can be something that can be worked together between, the producers of the plant-based protein and the seafood industry.
Thank you for sharing that. And now we will have just a little more time for this panel. But again, I encourage everyone to please keep sending in those questions. We really appreciate your interactivity, and we will be so happy to answer those in the Q&A session in a moment. But just before we wrap up this panel here, I would really like to draw attention to what might possibly move the needle here. I mean, we've talked a lot about transparency and technology and regulation to solve these massive challenges that exist. But what would you see as the best mechanisms to actually reward that kind of good behavior, good practice to catch or to produce seafood, fish, or the like products? Should we somehow magically try to increase the prices, keep the prices high so that these activities can be adequately funded? Are there some other mechanisms that you see that would give the right kind of rewards or also financial incentives to all the actors in the supply chain?
Maybe I can start. I think there is already a business case for businesses to transition towards sustainable sourcing. I think there was a recent study done by WWF and Accenture that really looked at the consumer market, and we see that they're becoming more aware of the importance of sustainability. They're trying to make sustainable choices. I think within the study, they found 75% of consumers want to behave more sustainably. They just lack the options to do so, while 50% say they just don't have enough variety for sustainable options. So when it comes to the business case, there is a consumer market that's primed to move to the sustainability. So incorporating that within your business model is really a core aspect moving forward, not just within the local consumer market. Even if we look at the international markets, export markets, sustainability is just becoming more and more core portion of the business model. And when it comes to your, sorry, go ahead, Susanna.
What about those people who, you know, to whom seafood or fish is not a luxury or premium, but who really rely on this kind of food for their proteins, that they, you know, to whom fish or seafood is the main source of protein? Do you also see some mechanisms to still reward the fisheries, the fishers, the farms, so that also in this segment, the sustainability practices will become more interesting?
Yeah, WWF is working with fisheries and aquaculture farms on what we call aquaculture improvement projects or fishery improvement projects. And this is really a win-win scenario for all, because this is where businesses can invest in conservation to stop biodiversity loss, to help regenerate or restore critical ecosystems. And within this improvement projects, where we step in is we give extension service, technical expertise to help them align to global certification standards. It's a win-win scenario for all, because businesses who are investing in it can ultimately source from these farms, from these fisheries, and they know where it's being produced, how it's being produced, and can verify the source. And for the farms itself, these people are also, like you said, they're dependent on fish, so that there's monetary investment coming in to really improve the social aspects, the environmental aspects of their practices. So it wins for both them, and for NGOs like us, it also increases the supply of responsible seafood. So these are some ways we incentivize fisheries and aquaculture farms that are improving their responsible practices, and then we kind of market them to a demand side of businesses who are looking for such products.
Thank you, Chester. What about you, Shirley? Any thoughts on this?
Thanks, Susanna. Yeah, I think which was highlighted by Chester just now about these FIPs. I think this has really been something that has been helping the industries or small-scale businesses, farms, to move towards a direction which they would not be able to do it if they were doing it on their own. And I think it's not about giving them incentives or rewarding them. I think it's important to make them understand how much premium they get for their product if they move towards sustainable. Once, I'm sure maybe David might add on, but I think if I know that I can sell my product at a premium price, and I'm really geared towards doing that, I will, push myself and make sure that I'm moving towards that direction. So it's important for the farmer or the fisherman to understand the premium price that he can get for his product if he's going to go for this kind of certification or move towards a more sustainable product. In that sense, we could also promote chemical-free from, to start off, we could move as a chemical-free product before going for a certified product.
Yeah, thank you for that. Access to markets and financing, right, for that kind of solution still could be a problem. But yeah, before we close up, Dr. Dalal, what do you think about the reward mechanisms? What should happen there?
Yeah, I think like for us, it's definitely about, let's say, food security and enhancing food security. So some of the technologies that we look at, such as the cell-based or even fermentation-based technologies, they're recreating, let's say, whole constructs of, let's say, of seafood, let's say meat, seafood, let's say pieces or seafood chunks. And for this, of course, it will open like a lot of opportunities for job creation within the community, bringing in like a whole slew of, let's say, scientists, engineers, bioprocessing engineers, as well as food chemists. So I think this will be a new driver for the economy. So like some of these sustainable businesses, yeah, they have huge implications for, of course, enhancing economies like, let's say, technology prowess, at the same time generating new products. For instance, some way that there will be complementary, let's say, synergies between traditional seafood sectors and the more innovative, let's say, novel ones is definitely cell lines. So like for a lot of the cell-based technologies, they need to have seafood cell lines, everything from crustaceans to, let's say, live seafood, and that will be something that will be, let's say, let's say sampled or taken from on a regular basis, ensuring, quality, safety, and quality, quality assurance, quality control, and safety. So I think, yeah,
so quite a lot of growth opportunities that should be rewarded by the markets, if I may summarize. That be correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. And David, any final words from you about rewarding the right kind of practices?
Rewarding, I think we do that anyway through brands. The challenge is still around properly pricing all the inputs to food, and I think there's still some work to be done on fully valuing what makes food possible. So we make choices, sometimes ideological choices between wild or aquaculture, but ultimately the current food system socialises many of the costs. So the environmental cost of burning diesel to send boats to sea, or the environmental cost of running a reduction fishery to create food for aquaculture species, or the chemicals that we use to facilitate production. They're all left in the environment. They're not necessarily, they're not built into the price of the product the consumers paying. So I think there's value in, and this is what we're trying to do, I guess, through our sort of fearless transparency approach, but the source of some broad measure of impact on that food choice for a client help become, it's like that's that light in the hill that we can all work to. And yes, sometimes we'll say, bugger it, it's Saturday, I got some friends over, I'll have that steak, and then you might live on Soylent Green biscuits for the rest of the week.
Well, I think, yeah, balanced nutrition is still something that we should strive for. Well, with that, I would like to thank you all, our panelists, very much. I think in conclusion, we can say that there is room for all these different, streams of fish and seafood, so whether wild caught, but caught, in a trackable and traceable manner, from fisheries where the base is maintained and controlled, to using certified solutions and helping the fish farms and farmers to adopt technology, to adopt cold chain, to ensure the cold chain all the way to consumer, and all the way to creating new job opportunities, creating new economic streams by totally reinventing all this, by enhancing all the technology and innovation that we can in the cell-based and also plant-based area. So I think if we look at the, not just the consumers here, but also the professional buyers who I think are in our audience today, I think there's a lot more choice today that is much more also transparent in terms of the supply chain and production methods. So I really encourage all of you to not just to perhaps go on with business as usual, but to pay attention to all these new and advanced and more sustainable offering that is out there. I think we also have a role to play, all of us, in explaining this better to our consumers and making the provenance and the production methods a part of the way we sell food and also experience food. So I also see opportunities to tell the food story better and back that obviously with data and evidence and certifications. So with that, please keep those questions coming. We'll be answering those in just a moment. And if you haven't also answered the poll, that I think might also still pop up. So thank you all very much for joining today, and we'll move on to the Q&A in a moment. Thank you very much.